The garish lights of the Crucible space station pulsed against the vast darkness of space, a cancerous growth of metal and corruption. Thane Mercer pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he navigated the cramped corridors, the recycled air carrying the stench of too many species pressed together in artificial gravity. He'd come to this backwater hellhole for ship parts, nothing more. Get in, make the exchange, get out, that was the plan. The Crucible had a reputation that extended across 3 systems. If something was illegal, immoral, or impossible to find elsewhere, you'd find it here. Thane had avoided the place for years, but desperation had a way of lowering standards. Special auction tonight, friend, a voice rasped from the shadows. A gaunt figure with augmented eyes that glowed an unnatural amber gestured toward a narrow passage. Rare specimens. Once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Not interested, Thane grunted, continuing his purposeful stride. But the commotion ahead stopped him. A crowd had gathered, their excited murmurs creating a discordant symphony of anticipation. Despite himself, Thane paused at the edge of the throng, curiosity momentarily overriding his better judgment. The auction house was cleverly disguised as a private club, its entrance marked only by a subtle holographic symbol that flickered in and out of existence. The crowd pushing inside was a mixture of species and classes, united only by the hungry gleam in their eyes. "What's the occasion?" Thane asked a nearby Corellian whose mottled skin rippled with excitement. "Syndicates offering a Verilyn," the alien replied, mandibles clicking. "Female. Prime condition." Thane's stomach nodded. The Verilyn were a peaceful, empathic species from the Cygnus sector. Their planet had been one of the first to fall to the Syndicate's expansion. Most had been killed, the survivors enslaved or worse. "Shouldn't you be inside, securing your bid?" Thane asked, his voice carefully neutral. The Corellian's compound eyes glinted. "Can't afford such luxuries. Just here to watch." The handler puts on quite a show. Before Thane could respond, the crowd surged forward, carrying him through the entrance against his will. Inside, the air was thick with exotic intoxicants and the pungent scent of too many bodies pressed together. The room was arranged in concentric circles descending toward a central stage bathed in harsh white light. Thane found himself trapped 3 rings from the center, unable to push back through the densely packed spectators. On stage, a tall figure in an iridescent suit appeared, arms spread wide in theatrical welcome. "Esteemed guests," the handler called out, voice amplified to reach every corner of the room. "Distinguished collectors and connoisseurs of the rare and exquisite, I welcome you to tonight's special presentation." The lights dimmed, leaving only the handler illuminated. His face bore the stretched, unnatural smoothness of extensive genetic modification, lips pulled into a perpetual smile. "Tonight, we have the honor of presenting a specimen of exceptional quality, reserved for our most valued client." The handler gestured toward a hulking man in a military uniform seated in a private box. "Commander Volkov, whose contributions to the Syndicate's cause have earned him the privilege of first refusal." Volkov inclined his head slightly, his broad face impassive save for the cold anticipation in his pale eyes. Thane recognized the insignia on his uniform. Syndicate Special Forces, responsible for some of the most brutal planetary suppressions in recent history. "And now," the handler continued, "I present to you Unit 52 Delta." A section of the stage floor slid open, and a platform rose. Upon it stood a woman, her violet skin luminous under the harsh lights. Her hair, a cascade of silver-white filaments, floated around her face as if suspended in water. She wore only a thin, translucent shift that did nothing to preserve her dignity. But it was her eyes that caught Thane's attention, large, almond-shaped, and utterly empty. The vibrant green that should have sparkled with the legendary intelligence of the Verilyn was dull, unfocused. "This specimen," the handler continued, circling her like a predator, "is a rare example of the Verilyn pleasure animal, genetically enhanced for heightened sensitivity." He reached out, running a finger along her bare shoulder. The woman didn't flinch, conditioned for absolute obedience. The memory hit Thane with the force of a physical blow, screams echoing through the comm system, the desperate pleas of civilians as a ship pulled away from the doomed settlement on Arcadia 4. Orders were orders, his commander had said. They couldn't risk Syndicate capture. They had to abandon the outpost and its people. Thane had obeyed. He'd lived with that choice every day since. The bidding will begin at 50,000 credits, the handler announced, though I remind our guests that Commander Volkov has priority. 100,000, Volkov stated flatly, without bothering to raise his hand. 100,000 from our esteemed commander, the handler repeated with exaggerated delight. Do I hear 120? The auction proceeded, each bid driving Thane's anger higher. This wasn't commerce. It was the systematic erasure of a person. With each bid, the crowd grew more animated, their excitement feeding on itself. 250,000, called a voice from the upper tiers. 250 from the Tauran ambassador, the handler acknowledged. Commander Volkov, would you care to respond? Volkov's expression hardened. 300,000, he growled. 300 it is, the handler beamed. Going once. Something broke inside Thane. A dam of suppressed guilt and rage that had been building since Arcadia 4. Before he could process his own actions, his voice rang out. 500,000. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. The handler's smile faltered for the first time. 500,000 from our unexpected participant, he said, eyes scanning the crowd until they found Thane. Commander Volkov has priority, of course. Volkov stood, his massive frame casting a shadow even from his elevated position. His eyes locked with Thane's, cold and calculating. The unit is mine, he stated, not bothering to increase his bid. By right of service to the Syndicate. 500,000, Thane repeated, louder this time, in untraceable credits. Transferred immediately. The handler's eyes widened at the amount. Even Volkov seemed taken aback. Commander, the handler said smoothly, perhaps we should. This is an insult, Volkov interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. I will remember your face, stranger. 500,000, Thane said for the third time, taking a step toward the stage. Unless the Syndicate's word is worth less than I thought. A tense silence fell over the room. The handler looked nervously between Thane and Volkov, clearly calculating the value of credits against Syndicate favor. 500,000, the handler finally announced, his jovial facade cracking. Sold to the gentleman in the back. What followed was a blur of motion and chaos. Thane approached the stage, transfer chip ready, hyper-aware of Volkov's murderous glare. The Verilyn woman remained motionless, unresponsive to the commotion around her. Unit 52 Delta is programmed to respond to direct commands, the handler murmured as he processed the payment. She'll follow basic instructions. More complex behaviors require. Breaking in. His smile returned, sickening in its suggestion. Her name, Thane demanded. The handler blinked in confusion. Excuse me. Her name. What's her name? It doesn't have a name, the handler replied, genuinely puzzled. It's a unit. Property. Thane turned away in disgust, approaching the platform where the woman still stood. Come with me, he said quietly, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the urgency pounding in his veins. She stepped down from the platform, movements fluid but mechanical. Her eyes remained fixed on some middle distance, seeing nothing. Thane removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, covering the obscene shift. She made no move to adjust it or acknowledge the gesture. We need to leave, he said, taking her elbow to guide her. Now. They had almost reached the exit when the first alarm blared. Red emergency lights flooded the room, turning the violet skin of the Verilyn woman a disturbing shade of blood. Security breach in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. All patrons please remain in place for identity verification. Volkov, Thane muttered. Change of plans. He tightened his grip on the woman's arm and veered toward a service corridor. The Crucible's labyrinthine structure worked both for and against them. The back passages were a maze, but they provided cover from the security drones, now swarming the main corridors. Thane navigated by instinct and half-remembered smugglers' tales, the Verilyn woman following without resistance or assistance. "Stop!" a mechanical voice commanded as they rounded a corner. A security drone hovered before them, weapons ports open. "Identify for scanning." Thane reacted without thinking, drawing his blaster and firing in one fluid motion. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, but the noise would attract others. "Run," he told the woman, pulling her along. They sprinted through the service tunnels, alarms blaring behind them. Twice more they encountered drones. Twice more Thane destroyed them. But time was running out. The station would be locked down soon, all ships grounded. Just a little further, Thane gasped as they reached the docking bay. His ship, the Wanderer, waited in Bay 17, an unremarkable light freighter that had been his home for the past 5 years. The docking bay was eerily quiet, the normal bustle of mechanics and cargo handlers absent. "Tenez sans crime danger." "There," a voice called from behind a stack of cargo containers. "Central docking platform." Thane shoved the Verilyn woman behind him as a squad of security officers emerged, weapons raised. Not station security, these were syndicate troops, their black uniforms unmistakable. "Hand over the property," the lead officer demanded, "and we might let you leave with your organs intact." "She's not property," Thane replied, his blaster aimed at the officer's chest. 5 seconds to comply. The officer continued as if Thane hadn't spoken. 5, 4. Thane dived behind a refueling station, pulling the woman with him as blaster fire erupted around them. The metal sizzled and warped from the energy weapons. "When I move," Thane whispered to the woman, "run straight for that ship." He pointed to the Wanderer, its ramp still closed. "Understand." For the first time, her eyes focused, briefly meeting his before returning to their vacant stare. It was enough for Thane. He activated the remote sequence for his ship, watching as the entry ramp began to lower. Then he leaned out from their cover and fired a rapid sequence of shots. 2 of the officers fell, and the others scattered for cover. "Now!" Thane shouted, laying down covering fire as he and the woman sprinted for the ship. More syndicate troops poured into the bay. Blaster fire scorched the deck around them. Thane felt a burning pain across his shoulder, but kept running. They reached the ramp just as the troops organized for a coordinated assault. "Get in." Thane shoved the woman up the ramp ahead of him, turning to fire a final volley before slapping the control panel. The ramp began to close, but not before a blaster bolt slipped through, striking the inner wall with a shower of sparks. Thane staggered to the cockpit, dropping into the pilot's seat. The Verilyn woman stood in the center of the cramped space, still unnaturally passive despite the chaos around her. "Strap in," Thane ordered as he initiated the launch sequence. The ship hummed to life, its engines warming faster than regulation safety limits allowed, one of the many modifications Thane had made over the years. Through the viewport, he could see the syndicate troops setting up a perimeter, heavy weapons being brought into position. They had seconds, not minutes. "Crucible control, this is unauthorized departure," a stern voice crackled over the comm. "Power down immediately, or we will open fire." Thane cut the communication and punched the thrusters to maximum. The Wanderer lurched upward, straining against the station's artificial gravity. Warning shots from the bay's defense turrets flashed past the viewport. "Come on, old girl," Thane muttered to his ship, hands flying over the controls. The Wanderer broke free of the docking clamps with a metallic shriek. Thane banked hard, aiming for the nearest exit port. More shots, these not warnings. The ship shuddered as a blast caught its underside. "Shield integrity at 70%, the ship's computer announced. The exit port loomed ahead, its massive doors beginning to close. Thane pushed the engines beyond safety parameters, feeling the deck vibrate beneath his feet. They slipped through the narrowing gap with meters to spare, the ship's hull screaming in protest. And then they were in open space, the starfield stretching endlessly before them. Thane didn't wait for pursuit. He punched in a series of short hyperspace jumps, a smuggler's trick to confuse tracking systems. The stars stretched into lines, and the Wanderer leapt into the safety of hyperspace. Only then did Thane allow himself to breathe. He turned to look at the Verilyn woman, who remained standing exactly where he'd left her, Fane's jacket still draped around her shoulders. "You can sit," he said, gesturing to the co-pilot's seat. "We're safe for now." She moved to the seat and perched on its edge, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Up close, Fane could see faint markings on her violet skin, swirling patterns that ran from her temples down her neck, disappearing beneath the jacket. "Do you understand me?" Fane asked, his voice gentler now that the immediate danger had passed. The woman nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "Do you have a name?" Fane asked. "Not a unit designation. A name." For a long moment, she remained silent. Then, her voice barely audible, she whispered, "Lyra." "Lyra," Fane repeated. "I'm Fane, and I'm not your—" He searched for a word that wouldn't further the offense. "Owner, you're free now." Her green eyes flickered to his face, confusion momentarily breaking through the emptiness. "Free." The word seemed foreign to her tongue. "Yes, you can go wherever you want. Do whatever you want." Fane ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how inadequate words were. "But you can stay with me until you figure things out. If you want." Lyra's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A minute relaxation, perhaps. "The first jump will end in about 20 minutes, Fane continued, filling the silence. "We'll make 2 more before we're clear of Syndicate space. Then we can figure out our next move." He stood, wincing as the movement reminded him of the blaster wound on his shoulder. "I'm going to check the ship for damage. You can rest or explore. The ship isn't big, but it's home." Fane left her in the cockpit, heading to the medical bay to treat his wound. As he applied antimicrobial gel to the angry red slash across his shoulder, he wondered what madness had possessed him. 500,000 credits, nearly every credit to his name, spent on an impulse. And now he was a fugitive from a syndicate, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the galaxy. Yet when he thought of Lyra standing on that auction platform, something inside him hardened with resolve. Whatever came next, he couldn't regret his decision. The Wanderer emerged from its final hyperspace jump into a quiet sector of space. Fane checked the scanners. No immediate threats. They had a brief reprieve, at least. He returned to the cockpit to find Lyra exactly as he'd left her, still perched on the edge of the co-pilot's seat. Her stillness was unnerving. "Are you hungry?" Fane asked. Lyra turned to look at him. "This unit does not require sustenance at this time." Fane frowned. "You're not a unit. You're a person. Lyra is your name, right?" A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, crossed her face. "Yes, Lyra. That was before." "Before what?" "Before the tanks. Before the conditioning." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but the words themselves carried weight. Fane sat in the pilot's seat, turning to face her fully. "What happened to you, Lyra? To your people?" For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in that same detached voice, she began to speak. "The Syndicate came 3 orbital cycles ago. They wanted our empathic abilities. Some for interrogation, some for entertainment." Her gaze drifted to the viewport. "My mother hid me in the sacred caves. But they found us. Everyone. They took the strongest for conditioning. The rest were terminated." Fane's fists clenched involuntarily. "And they put you in tanks. Neural reconfiguration, chemical alteration, pleasure centers stimulated when compliant, pain centers when resistant." The clinical way she described her own torture was almost more disturbing than the content itself. "This unit, I was designated for pleasure service due to physical attributes." "And how many?" Fane couldn't finish the question. "This unit has served 17 masters before Commander Volkov's acquisition attempt." Fane stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the rage building inside him. "That's over now," he said firmly. "No one will hurt you again." Lyra watched him with that same unnervingly blank expression. The handler said similar things. "Before the pain." The simple statement cut through Fane's anger, replacing it with a cold determination. "I'm not the handler," he said quietly, "and I'll prove it, day by day if that's what it takes." He moved to a storage compartment and retrieved a medical scanner. "May I?" he asked, holding it up. I want to check for tracking devices. The syndicate usually implants them in there. In people they want to control. Lyra nodded, still watching him with that careful blankness. The scanner hummed as Thane moved it over her body, keeping a respectful distance. When it passed over her left shoulder, the device beeped insistently. There, Thane said, checking the readout. Subcutaneous tracker, military grade. That's how they'll try to find us. He looked up at Lyra. I can remove it, but it will hurt. Pain is irrelevant, Lyra replied automatically. It's not irrelevant to me, Thane countered. I'll use a local anesthetic, and I'll be as careful as I can. Something shifted in Lyra's expression, a subtle softening, perhaps, though it was gone so quickly Thane might have imagined it. Rest, Thane told her. We'll deal with the tracker once we reach somewhere safer. He hesitated, then added, the cabin on the right is yours. There are clothes in the storage unit. Food in the galley if you get hungry. He turned to leave, but Lyra's voice stopped him. Why? She asked, the single word holding a universe of questions. Thane looked back at her. Because you're a person, not a unit, not property, and I've stood by and watched people suffer before. I won't do it again. The admission cost him, but he forced the words out. Sleep if you can, Lyra. Tomorrow will be another day. 2 days later, the Wanderer docked at Reland's Reach, a sprawling space station on the edge of the frontier worlds. Unlike the Crucible, Reland's Reach had no pretensions to legitimacy. It was a haven for smugglers, mercenaries, and anyone seeking to disappear from official records. It's not much, Thane said as they approached the docking bay, but the security is minimal and no one asks questions. Lyra stood beside him in the cockpit, dressed in a simple jumpsuit Thane had found in storage. In the 2 days since their escape, small changes had appeared in her demeanor, moments of curiosity, flashes of awareness in her eyes. She still moved with that eerie grace, still spoke rarely and briefly, but Thane sensed something awakening beneath the conditioned exterior. We need supplies, Thane continued as the ship settled into its berth. And I know a medic here who can help with the tracker. You will leave the ship? Lyra asked, a new note of concern in her voice. We both will, Thane replied. It's not safe for you to stay here alone. The Wanderer's security is good, but not perfect. Fear flickered across Lyra's face, the most emotion Thane had seen from her. There will be many people. Thane understood her apprehension. Yes, but not like the Crucible. And you'll be with me. He hesitated, then added, I won't let anyone hurt you, Lyra. I promise. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. I will accompany you. Reland's Reach bustled with activity, its corridors packed with a diverse assortment of species. The air was thick with the smell of various cuisines, mechanical oil, and too many bodies in too small a space. Thane kept Lyra close as they navigated the crowded passages, heading for a section known as the Warrants. Stay close, Thane murmured as they entered a narrower corridor. The medic's place is just ahead. Lyra moved with surprising agility, her steps silent beside his. Occasionally, her hand would brush against his arm, as if reassuring herself of his presence. The medic's clinic was disguised as a parts shop, its entrance marked only by a faded sign in an obscure dialect. Thane knocked in a specific pattern, waiting until a hidden scanner verified his identity before the door slid open. Inside, the space was surprisingly clean and orderly. Medical equipment, much of it modified or cobbled together from disparate parts, lined the walls. A tall, thin woman with cybernetic enhancements covering half her face looked up from a workbench. Thane Mercer, she said, her voice carrying a metallic undertone. I heard you were dead. Not yet, Vex, Thane replied with a grim smile, though not for lack of trying. Vex artificial, I whirred as it focused on Lyra. And who's your friend? Don't tell me you've taken up slavery. The opposite, Thane said firmly. This is Lyra. She has a syndicate tracker we need removed. Vex's expression hardened at the mention of the syndicate. Nasty business, they're trackers. Come, let me see. Lyra hesitated, looking to Thane for reassurance. It's okay, he told her. Vex is a friend. She can help. Slowly, Lyra approached the medic, who gestured for her to sit on an examination table. Vex ran a scanner over Lyra's shoulder, her artificial eye processing the data in real time. Military-grade syndicate tech, Vex confirmed. Subcutaneous, but with tendrils extending into the surrounding tissue. Removing it will be painful, even with anesthetic. Can you do it? Thane asked. Vex nodded. Yes, but there's a complication. The tracker has a dead man's switch. If removed incorrectly, it will send a final location ping before shutting down. Thane swore under his breath. So they'll know exactly where we are. Unless, Vex continued, we can shield the signal. I have a containment field, but it's only temporary. You need to be off station within an hour of removal. Thane glanced at Lyra, who was watching the exchange with unnerving intensity. Your choice, he told her. We can wait, try to find another way. Remove it, Lyra said firmly. The most decisive Thane had heard her. Please. Vex nodded and began preparing her equipment. I'll need to put her under for this. The procedure is too delicate for local anesthesia alone. As Vex administered the sedative, Lyra's hand unexpectedly reached for Thane's. He took it, surprised by the strength of her grip. You'll be here, she asked, her voice already growing drowsy. Right beside you, Thane promised. The whole time, her eyes fluttered closed, and her hand relaxed in his. Thane stayed where he was, watching as Vex began the delicate procedure of extracting the tracker. You care for her, Vex observed as she worked, her tone neutral. She's been through hell, Thane replied, evading the implicit question. Haven't we all? Vex murmured, focused on her task. But not all of us find someone willing to risk everything to save us. The procedure took nearly an hour, Vex working with painstaking precision to extract the tracker without triggering its failsafe. When she finally lifted the small device free, placing it immediately in a shielded container, she exhaled slowly. Done, she announced. The containment will hold for about 50 minutes. After that, the signal will break through. Thane nodded, already calculating their escape route. How long until she wakes up? 20 minutes, give or take. Vex began closing the small incision on Lyra's shoulder. But I wouldn't recommend moving her for at least. A sharp alarm cut through the clinic, making both Thane and Vex freeze. Proximity alert, Vex said, moving to console. Someone's trying to bypass the security lock. Thane's hand moved to his blaster. Syndicate, can't tell, Vex replied, fingers flying over the controls. But they're using military-grade decryption. Lyra stirred on the table, the alarm piercing through her sedation. Her eyes opened, unfocused but alert to the danger. We need to go, Thane said, helping Lyra to a sitting position. Is there a back way out? Vex nodded, pressing a hidden switch that revealed a narrow passage. Maintenance tunnel. It'll take you to the lower docking levels. Your ship, Bay 37. This will get you close. Vex handed Thane a small device. Signal scrambler. Won't last long, but might buy you time. The security door at the front of the clinic shuddered under impact. Go, Vex urged, pressing a blaster into Lyra's hands. I'll hold them as long as I can. Thane hesitated. Vex, save it, she cut him off. Just get her out of here. And Thane, her expression softened momentarily. Find somewhere worth staying this time. There was no time for a proper goodbye. Thane guided Lyra into the tunnel, hearing the security door give way as they disappeared into the darkness. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and poorly lit, forcing them to move in a half-crouch. Lyra, despite the lingering effects of sedation, moved with surprising grace. The blaster Vex had given her was held with the comfortable familiarity of experience. You know how to use that? Thane asked in a whisper as they reached a junction. Lyra nodded. Combat training was part of conditioning. All units learned basic weapons proficiency. Something about her tone had changed. A new alertness, a presence that hadn't been there before. Thane wondered if the removal of the tracker had broken more than just the physical connection to the Syndicate. They emerged into a service corridor one level above the docking bays. The station alarm was blaring now, a general alert rather than a targeted one. They're looking for us, Thane said, checking the path ahead. but they don't know exactly where we are yet. They made it halfway to the docking bay before trouble found them. A figure stepped out from across corridor, dressed in the nondescript attire of a civilian, but moving with military precision. The Syndicate courier's eyes widened in recognition. Target located, he said into a comm unit. Lower service level, section. Lyra's blast caught him square in the chest before he could finish the transmission. The courier dropped without a sound, his comm unit clattering to the floor. Thane stared at Lyra in shock. She met his gaze, her green eyes now burning with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "We should hurry," she said simply, stepping over the courier's body. They ran the rest of the way to the docking bay, encountering no further resistance. But as they approached the Wanderer, Thane's security sensors warned of multiple hostiles converging on their position. "Get aboard," Thane ordered, activating the entry ramp. "I'll hold them off." Lyra ignored him, taking position behind a stack of cargo containers. "Two targets approaching from the east corridor," she reported. One from above. Before Thane could argue, the first Syndicate agent appeared. Lyra fired with precision, forcing the agent to dive for cover. Thane joined her, providing covering fire as they retreated toward the ship. The firefight was brief but intense. Lyra moved with fluid grace, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. She and Thane worked in tandem as if they'd fought together for years, anticipating each other's movements and covering vulnerabilities. "Go!" Thane shouted as the entry ramp fully extended. They made a final dash for the ship, blaster fire sizzling around them. Thane slapped the control panel as soon as they were inside, the ramp closing just as a volley of shots struck the hull. He raced to the cockpit, Lyra right behind him. "Releasing docking clamps," Thane announced, hands flying over the controls. "Auxiliary power to shields." The Wanderer hummed to life, breaking free from its berth with a lurch. More shots peppered the hull as Syndicate agents poured into the docking bay. "Hang on," Thane warned as he punched the thrusters to maximum. The ship shot forward, scraping against the bay doors as they barely cleared the opening. And then they were in open space, the stars stretching before them as Thane engaged the hyperdrive. The familiar blue tunnel of hyperspace enveloped them, and for the moment at least, they were safe. In the sudden quiet of the cockpit, Thane turned to Lyra. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder where the tracker had been. "Yes, I feel different." "Different how?" Lyra seemed to struggle for words. "Clearer, like a fog has lifted." She looked at him directly, her gaze steady. "Thank you." It was Vex who removed the tracker. Thane deflected, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Not just for that," Lyra said. "For seeing me as a person. For using my name." The simplicity of her statement struck Thane to his core. "You're a person, Lyra. You always were." She was silent for a long moment. "The tracker wasn't just for location," she finally said. "It contained chemical regulators, mood suppressants, control mechanisms." Thane's hands tightened on the controls. "So, with it gone, I will become more myself," Lyra confirmed. "Whatever that means now." The days that followed brought gradual but profound changes in Lyra. Without the tracker's chemical influences, her personality emerged like a flower, slowly unfurling. She began to speak more, to ask questions, to express preferences. Her movements lost some of their mechanical precision, becoming more natural, more her own. Thane gave her space to explore these changes, offering guidance only when asked. He found himself fascinated by her transformation, by the person emerging from beneath the Syndicate's conditioning. They established a routine aboard the Wanderer, making short jumps through border systems to evade pursuit. Thane taught Lyra the basics of piloting, navigation, and ship maintenance. She proved a quick learner, her natural intelligence shining through now that the chemical suppressants were gone. One evening, as they shared a meal in the ship's small galley, Lyra asked the question Thane had been dreading. "Why did you save me?" Thane considered deflecting, but decided she deserved honesty. 5 years ago, I was part of a military escort for a civilian outpost on Arcadia 4. When the syndicate attacked, we were ordered to evacuate, military personnel only. He stared into his cup, avoiding her eyes. We left 300 civilians behind. I followed orders. I obeyed, and I've had to live with that choice every day since. Lyra was silent, watching him with those intense green eyes. When I saw you standing there, Thane continued, the words coming faster now, being sold like cargo, treated like you weren't even a person, I couldn't walk away. Not again. He finally met her gaze. I don't expect that to make sense. It does, Lyra said softly. More than you know. She hesitated, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, exposing more of the swirling markings on her violet skin. Do you know what these are? Thane shook his head. Virulent markings? I assumed they were. Genetic. They're memory lines, Lyra explained, tracing one with her finger. Each pattern represents lineage, experiences, connections. When one virulent touches another, these allow us to share memories, emotions. Her voice grew softer. The syndicate couldn't remove them without damaging our empathic abilities, which they valued. So instead, they tried to suppress what they mean. She reached across the table and, with deliberate care, took Thane's hand. The touch sent a shiver through him. Not unpleasant, but startling in its intensity. I can't share memories with humans the way I could with my people, Lyra said. But the connection remains in a different form. I sense your regret, Thane, your desire to make amends. It radiates from you like heat from a star. Thane felt oddly exposed, as if she could see straight through him. Yet there was comfort in being truly seen, perhaps for the first time. What happened to your people, he asked. Are there others who escaped? Pain flickered across Lyra's face. I don't know. The syndicate was thorough in their destruction. Those who weren't useful to them were eliminated. Those who were. She didn't need to finish the thought. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Finally, Lyra spoke again. What happens now? Where will we go? Thane had been avoiding this question, even in his own mind. Somewhere far from syndicate space, he said. Somewhere you can be safe. And you? Lyra asked. What will you do? The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on immediate survival, on keeping them both alive, that he hadn't considered what came after. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Perhaps, Lyra suggested, her voice gentle, we could find a way to help others. They're more like me, trapped, conditioned, waiting for someone to see them as people again. The idea hit Thane with unexpected force. Purpose had been missing from his life since he'd left military service, replaced by mere survival and the gnawing guilt of Arcadia 4. What Lyra proposed was dangerous, perhaps suicidal. It would make them permanent targets of the syndicate, but it would also mean doing something that mattered. It wouldn't be safe, he cautioned. Lyra's lips curved in a small, sad smile. Safety is an illusion, Thane. I learned that when my world burned. What matters is how we choose to live with that knowledge. The next morning, they gathered in the med bay to examine the tracking device Vex had removed. Sealed in its containment field, the small metallic object seemed deceptively harmless. If we could understand how it works, Thane mused, maybe we could locate others with similar implants. Lyra studied the device, her brow furrowed in concentration. The syndicate maintains a central tracking system. All units, all captives, are monitored from regional control centers. Thane looked at her in surprise. How do you know that? I wasn't always a pleasure unit, Lyra said, the designation clearly painful to voice. Before they decided my final purpose, I was trained in various areas. I spent time in a communication hub, monitoring tracking signals. A plan began to form in Thane's mind. So if we could access one of these control centers, we could identify the location of every captive Virulent, Lyra finished, and potentially others the syndicate has enslaved. It would be heavily guarded, Thane warned. Yes, Lyra agreed. But I know their protocols, their security measures. And with the tracker gone, my abilities are returning. She hesitated. There's something else you should know. She turned away from him, lifting the back of her shirt to expose her spine. Along her vertebrae ran a complex pattern of markings different from those on her arms and face. These were deeper, almost luminous. This is my clan mark, Lyra explained. The symbol of my house. I am, daughter to the high empath of the Southern Reach. She let her shirt fall back into place and turned to face him. I was being transported to my final assignment when our ship was intercepted by the Syndicate. They recognized my value immediately. Your royalty, Thane said, pieces falling into place. Lyra shook her head. Not as humans understand it. My position was one of service, not privilege. The high empath connects all Verilyn, feels our collective pain and joy, helps maintain balance. And you inherited this ability, Thane guessed. In part, Lyra confirmed. It was emerging when I was captured. The Syndicate's conditioning suppressed it, but now... She gestured to where the tracker had been. I can feel it awakening again. If there are other Verilyn alive, I might be able to sense them, given time and proximity. The implications were staggering. Not only did they have a potential way to locate captives through the tracking system, but Lyra herself might serve as a living detector for her own people. We'll need help, Thane said. Contacts, equipment, intel. I know a few people who might. The ship's alert system interrupted him, a harsh blaring that signaled approaching vessels. Proximity warning, the computer announced. 3 vessels on intercept course. Thane rushed to the cockpit, Lyra close behind. The scanner showed 3 small fighters, their configuration unmistakable. Syndicate pursuit craft, Thane said grimly. Fast and heavily armed. How do they find us? Lyra asked. The tracker is contained. They must have traced us from Reland's reach, Thane replied, initiating evasive maneuvers. Probably had agents watching all outgoing ships. The Wanderer bucked as the first shots struck their aft shields. Thane pushed the engines hard, banking into a tight spiral that their pursuers couldn't match with their faster but less maneuverable craft. They're trying to herd us toward that moon, Thane observed, noting the fighter's pattern. Probably have reinforcements waiting. Can we jump to hyperspace? Lyra asked, strapping herself into the co-pilot's seat. Thane shook his head. Not without calculating a safe route. We'd risk materializing inside a star or planet. Another volley struck them, the shields flickering dangerously. Shield integrity at 40%, the computer reported. We can't outrun them, and we can't outgun them, Thane muttered. But maybe we can outsmart them. He banked the ship suddenly, diving toward the nearby moon rather than away from it. The unexpected move caught their pursuers off guard, giving the Wanderer a momentary advantage. The lunar surface shows significant magnetic interference, Lyra observed, reading the scanner. It's disrupting their targeting systems. Exactly, Thane confirmed, pushing the ship into a steep descent toward the moon's craggy surface. We'll use the magnetic fields to lose them, then circle back and make our jump once we're clear. The plan was risky, flying at breakneck speed through unfamiliar terrain, relying on the Wanderer's superior maneuverability. But with 3 Syndicate fighters on their tail, options were limited. They skimmed over the lunar surface, weaving between towering rock formations that rose like jagged teeth from the barren ground. The magnetic interference grew stronger, the ship's instruments flickering and readouts becoming unreliable. Hold on, Thane warned as he took them into a narrow canyon. The walls so close they nearly scraped the hull. 2 of the pursuit craft followed, their sleeker forms barely fitting the tight space. The third, perhaps more cautious, circled above, waiting for them to emerge. There, Lyra pointed to a branching passage ahead. The magnetic readings are strongest in that direction. Thane didn't hesitate, banking hard into the indicated passage. The ship groaned under the strain, but the gamble paid off. As they entered the area of peak magnetic disturbance, their instruments failed completely, and so did their pursuers. Flying blind, relying only on visual reference and instinct, Thane guided the Wanderer through the twisting passages. Behind them, they heard rather than saw the impact as one of the pursuit craft misjudged the narrow space and clipped the canyon wall, spiraling into a crash. One down, Thane murmured, focusing intensely on the treacherous path ahead. They emerged from the canyon into a vast crater, momentarily exposed. The remaining ships quickly converged, weapons firing. Several shots struck home, the ship lurching violently. Hull breach in cargo section, the computer announced. Emergency containment active. Thane swore, pulling the Wanderer into a steep climb. We need to end this now. As they broke atmosphere, the magnetic interference faded, instruments returning to normal function. The two remaining fighters pursued doggedly, continuing to chip away at their failing shields. Calculate hyperspace jump, Thane ordered the computer. Nearest safe coordinates. Calculating, the computer responded. Estimated completion, 3 minutes. We don't have 3 minutes, Thane muttered. Lyra studied the tactical display. Their attack pattern is predictable, she observed. They're alternating fire, maintaining constant pressure. An idea struck Thane. If we could get them to fire simultaneously, their weapons would overload our shields completely, Lyra warned. Yes, but it would create a momentary opening, Thane explained. A gap in their fire we could use to turn and strike back. Understanding dawned on Lyra's face. You want to fight? Just enough to buy us time for the jump calculations, Thane confirmed. Ready, Lyra nodded, hands moving to the weapons controls. Thane had shown her the basics during their time together, but he hadn't expected her to need the skills so soon. On my mark, Thane said, watching the pursuit craft fall into their predictable rhythm. 3, 2, 1, now. He cut the engines abruptly, the sudden deceleration causing their pursuers to overshoot. Simultaneously, Lyra fired the rear weapons, catching one of the fighters with a direct hit. It didn't destroy the craft, but damaged its weapons array, rendering it temporarily harmless. The remaining fighter looped around, coming at them head-on. Thane waited until the last possible moment, then rolled the Wanderer in a maneuver that would have been impossible for a larger vessel. Lyra fired again as they passed, her timing perfect. The fighter exploded in a silent flash, debris peppering their already damaged hull. Jump calculations complete, the computer announced. Engage, Thane ordered. The stars stretched into lines, and the Wanderer leapt into hyperspace, leaving the damaged fighter and the lunar battlefield behind. The adrenaline of the escape faded slowly, replaced by the sobering reality of their situation. The Wanderer was damaged, their location compromised. The Syndicate's pursuit would only intensify now. Damage report, Thane requested as he set the ship on autopilot. Hull breach contained by emergency force field, the computer replied. Shield generators operating at 30% capacity. Fuel reserves at 45%. Thane sighed. We need repairs. And soon. Lyra was quiet, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new resolve. We can't keep running, Thane. Each escape narrows our options. What are you suggesting? That we stop reacting and start acting, Lyra said. You asked where we should go. I have an answer now. She met his eyes steadily. The Syndicate regional headquarters on Helios Prime. Thane stared at her in disbelief. You want to go to the heart of Syndicate territory? That's suicide. It's also where we'll find the tracking control center, Lyra countered, and possibly the largest concentration of my people outside of the conditioning facilities. Even if we could get there, and that's a massive if, how will we get inside? The security would be impenetrable. A smile ghosted across Lyra's face, sad but determined. Not for me. Not if I'm being delivered. As property. Understanding dawned, and with it horror. No, absolutely not. I'm not using you as bait. Not bait, Lyra corrected. A Trojan horse. With the tracker removed, I can maintain my full awareness even while appearing to be a conditioned unit. I know their protocols, their security measures. I can get us inside. It's too dangerous, Thane insisted. More dangerous than being hunted across the galaxy? Lyra challenged. The Syndicate won't stop, Thane. Not now that they know I've escaped. Not now that they've seen what you're willing to do to protect me. Deep down, Thane knew she was right. They couldn't outrun the Syndicate forever. Eventually, their luck would run out, their ship would fail, or they'd find themselves cornered without escape. We would need a perfect plan, he said finally. No margin for error. Yes, Lyra agreed. And help. Allies. I might know someone, Thane admitted reluctantly. An old contact from my military days. Ilrich. Last I heard, he was running an underground network helping people escape Syndicate territory. Can you trust him? Lyra asked. As much as I trust anyone, Thane replied. Which isn't saying much. But he hates the Syndicate as much as we do, and he has resources we need. Decision made. They set course for Valen's Cross, a mining colony where Ilrich was rumored to maintain one of his safe houses. The journey would take 3 days, even pushing the Wanderer's damaged systems. During those days, Lyra's transformation continued. She spoke more of her past, of Verulan culture and traditions. She practiced her empathic abilities, which grew stronger daily without the suppression of the tracker. Thane found himself increasingly drawn to her, not just to her physical beauty, which had been engineered by the Syndicate to appeal to human sensibilities, but to her resilience, her intelligence, her quiet strength. She had endured horrors he could barely comprehend, yet retained her essential self. On the third night of their journey, as the Wanderer cruised through hyperspace, Thane awoke to find Lyra standing in the doorway of his cabin. I couldn't sleep, she explained softly. Too many thoughts. Thane sat up, moving to make room for her on the edge of the bunk. Want to talk about it? She sat beside him, her presence filling the small space with a subtle warmth. I keep thinking about what happens after. If we succeed, if we fail. We're not going to fail, Thane said with more confidence than he felt. Lyra smiled knowingly. Your mouth says one thing, but your feelings say another. She tapped her temple. Empath, remember? Thane sighed. It's a dangerous plan, but it's also our best shot. And if we succeed? Lyra pressed. What then? It was a question Thane had been avoiding. Success meant freedom for Lyra and potentially many others. It also meant the end of their time together. The thought pained him more than he was ready to admit. You'll be free to go wherever you want, he said carefully. Do whatever you want. And what about what you want, Thane? The directness of the question caught him off guard. What did he want? For so long, he'd been running, from his past, from himself. With Lyra, for the first time in years, he'd found purpose. Connection. I want you to be safe, he answered finally. Happy. Lyra's hand found his in the dim light of the cabin. Those things are not separate from you, Thane. Not anymore. The touch of her hand sent a wave of sensation through him. Not just physical, but emotional. He could feel her sincerity, her affection, her trust. The Verulan empathic connection, he realized, sharing her feelings with him. Lyra, he began, uncertain how to respond to this new intimacy. I know humans move more slowly in these matters, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. But my people believe in speaking truth, in honoring connection when it forms. And has it? Thane asked. Form, I mean. In answer, Lyra leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning. Thane responded with equal gentleness, afraid of pushing too far, too fast. When they separated, her eyes shimmered in the low light. Yes, she whispered. It has formed. They remained together until morning, talking, touching, exploring this new dimension of their relationship. Lyra shared more of Verulan customs, the significance of physical connection in her culture. Thane spoke of his past, of dreams abandoned and hopes rekindled. There was no rush to physical intimacy. What they shared was deeper, more profound. As the Wanderer approached Valen's Cross, they did so not just as allies in a common cause, but as partners in a deeper sense. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. The mining colony appeared on their scanners, a sprawling complex carved into the side of an asteroid. Its exterior was industrial and uninviting, but beneath the surface lay a thriving community of miners, engineers, and those seeking escape from Syndicate influence. Valen's Cross Control. This is the Wanderer requesting docking permission. Thane transmitted as they approached. Authentication code Sierra Tango 946. There was a pause, then authentication accepted. Wanderer. Proceed to Base 17. Thane guided the ship carefully into the designated bay, the damage from their recent battle making handling sluggish. Once docked, he activated the security protocols. Not that they would stop a determined attacker, but they might slow one down. Stay close, he told Lyra as they prepared to disembark. Valen's Cross is technically neutral territory, but the Syndicate has spies everywhere. Lyra nodded, adjusting the hood of the cloak she wore to conceal her distinctive features. How will we find your contact? We don't, Thane replied. He finds us. The interior of Valen's Cross was a stark contrast to its exterior. Where the outside was all industrial functionality, the inside was a chaotic blend of mining operation and frontier settlement. The main concourse bustled with activity, miners ending their shifts, traders hawking goods, engineers tinkering with equipment. Thane led Lyra to a small tavern called the Broken Drill, its entrance marked by a stylized hologram of the tool in question. Inside, the lighting was dim, the air heavy with smoke from various substances of questionable legality. They found a booth in the back corner with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Now we wait, Thane said, ordering drinks that would give them reason to linger. They didn't wait long. Less than an hour after their arrival, a tall figure in a miner's jumpsuit approached their table. His face was weathered, one eye replaced by a cybernetic implant that whirred softly as it focused. Thane Mercer, the man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. 5 years, no word, and suddenly you're on my doorstep. Must be something big. Hello. Ilrich, Thane replied. Mind if we talk somewhere more private? Ilrich's artificial eye scanned Lyra, who remained hooded. Depends on what, or who, you've brought with you. She's with me, Thane said firmly. And yes, it's big. Syndicate big. The cybernetic eye whirred again. Follow me. Leave separately. 3 minutes apart. Storage Facility B, Level 4. With that, Ilrich departed, disappearing into the crowd as unobtrusively as he'd appeared. Can we trust him? Lyra asked quietly. We're about to find out, Thane replied. Storage Facility B turned out to be a maze of shipping containers and maintenance equipment. Ilrich was waiting beside a nondescript crate, his posture relaxed but alert. When they approached, he activated a small device that emitted a soft hum. Signal jammer, he explained. Now, who's your friend? Lyra lowered her hood, revealing her violet skin and luminous eyes. Ilrich's expression shifted from curiosity to shock. A Verilyn, he breathed, alive and unbound. Her name is Lyra, Thane said, and we need your help. Over the next hour, they explained their situation and their plan. Ilrich listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. You want to infiltrate Helios Prime, he summarized when they finished. The most heavily guarded Syndicate facility in 3 sectors. With a damaged ship, no backup, and a plan that relies on Lyra pretending to be a conditioned slave. He shook his head. You always did aim high, Mercer. Can you help us or not? Thane asked bluntly. Ilrich was silent for a long moment, his organic eye studying them both intently. What you're proposing could cripple Syndicate operations across the entire sector, he said finally. If, and it's a massive if, you succeed. We have to try, Lyra said, speaking directly to Ilrich for the first time. My people are suffering, dying, and not just my people, beings from dozens of worlds, all treated as property. Ilrich's gaze softened as he looked at her. I know, we've been fighting the Syndicate for years, trying to help people escape. But what you're suggesting, he sighed, it's a suicide mission. Not with the right support, Thane countered. You have resources, Ilrich. Contact. Intelligence on Syndicate operations. And why should I risk all that on your plan? Ilrich challenged. Because it's not just my plan, Thane replied. It's the right thing to do. The thing we should have done years ago, instead of following orders and abandoning civilians to save our own skins. Ilrich flinched, the reference to their shared past striking home. Low blow, Mercer. But accurate, Thane pressed. We've both been running from Arcadia for 5 years. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started fighting back. The mention of Arcadia seemed to shift something in Ilrich. His posture changed, his cybernetic eye focusing intently on Thane. You always were a persuasive bastard, he muttered. Fine, I'll help you. Not because I think you'll succeed, but because I'm tired of watching the Syndicate win. Relief washed through Thane. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ilrich warned. First, we need to get your ship repaired. Then we need to plan this insanity properly. He gestured for them to follow. Come on, I have a secure facility where we can talk freely. Over the next 3 days, the Wanderer underwent extensive repairs in a hidden maintenance bay beneath the official docking area. Ilrich's contacts worked efficiently, replacing damaged hull plates and restoring the shield generators to full capacity. Meanwhile, Thane, Lyra, and Ilrich meticulously planned their infiltration of Helios Prime. The central tracking facility is here, Ilrich explained, pointing to a holographic schematic of the Syndicate headquarters. Level 37, heavily guarded, limited access. That's where they monitor all implanted trackers? Lyra asked, studying the layout with intense concentration. Ilrich nodded. Every unit in Syndicate possession is tracked from that room. Not just location data, biometric readings, behavioral compliance, everything. And from there, we could locate all captive Verilyn, Thane said. Theoretically, Ilrich confirmed. But getting in won't be easy. Lyra's plan to pose as a conditioned unit could get you past the initial security, but once inside, I'll need credentials, Thane mused. A reason to be delivering a high-value unit directly to headquarters. What about Volkov? Lyra suggested. The name still sent a chill through her, but she kept her voice steady. He's a high-ranking officer, if you posed as his agent. Ilrich's cybernetic eye whirred as he considered the idea. That might work. Volkov is currently deployed on the Iridium front, far from Helios Prime. It would take days for any verification request to reach him. So I pose as Volkov's agent, delivering his property that was recovered after the theft, Thane summarized. That gets us inside. Then what? Then I guide us to the tracking facility, Lyra said. Once there, we access the system, download the location data for all Verilyn, and transmit it to Ilrich's network. And if something goes wrong, Ilrich pressed. If they discover you're not conditioned, or Thane's cover is blown, Lyra and Thane exchanged a glance. Then we improvise, Thane said grimly. Ilrich shook his head. Not good enough. You need a backup plan, an escape route. The maintenance shafts, Lyra suggested, pointing to the schematic. They run throughout the facility. I memorized their layout during my time in the communication hub. Good, Ilrich nodded. And I'll have a strike team on standby, ready to create a diversion if needed. We've been waiting for an opportunity to hit Helios Prime. This could be it. The plan took shape over hours of discussion, each detail examined and refined. Ilrich's network provided everything they needed. Forged credentials, identifying Thane as Lieutenant Harding, one of Volkov's subordinates. High-security clearance codes, even a Syndicate officer's uniform tailored to Thane's measurements. On the evening before their departure, Ilrich found Thane alone in the maintenance bay, running final checks on the Wanderer's systems. You realize the odds of this working are minimal, Ilrich said without preamble. Thane continued his work, not looking up. I know, yet you're still going through with it. It wasn't a question. Yes. Ilrich was silent for a moment, then said softly, It's her, isn't it? The Verilyn. Lyra. Now, Thane did look up, his expression guarded. What about her? I've seen how you look at her, Ilrich said. How she looks at you. This isn't just about freeing slaves or fighting the Syndicate for you anymore. Thane sighed, setting down his tools. Doesn't matter why I'm doing it as long as it gets done? It matters if it clouds your judgment, Ilrich countered. If it makes you take unnecessary risks. My judgment has never been clearer, Thane replied. And every risk we take is necessary. Ilrich studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. I've added something to your equipment, he said, handing Thane a small device. Emergency beacon. If things go completely sideways, activate it. It'll send your exact location to my team. We'll come in hot. Thane took the beacon, understanding the significance of the gesture. That would expose your entire network. Yes, Ilrich agreed simply. It would. They looked at each other, years of shared history and unspoken regrets passing between them. Finally, Thane extended his hand. Thank you. Ilrich clasped it firmly. Don't make me have to use it. Later that night, Thane found Lyra on the observation deck of Ilrich's facility, gazing out at the star field visible through the reinforced viewport. She turned as he approached, her luminous eyes reflecting the distant stars. "Our last night of freedom," she said softly. "At least for a while." Thane moved to stand beside her, following her gaze out to the cosmos. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," Lyra admitted, "but not of dying, of failing, of coming so close to freeing my people, only to fall short." "We won't fail," Thane said, though he knew the promise was one he might not be able to keep. Lyra turned to face him fully, her expression solemn. "Thane, before we go, there's something I need to tell you." She hesitated, then continued. "If something happens to me tomorrow—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Thane interrupted. "If it does," Lyra persisted, "I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You gave me back my name, my identity. You saw me when everyone else looked through me." She reached up, her violet fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You brought me back to life." The touch of her fingers sent waves of emotion through their connection. Gratitude, tenderness, and something deeper, more profound. Thane caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek. "We're going to make it through this," he promised. "Together." "Together," Lyra echoed, stretching up to kiss him. Unlike their first kiss, tentative and questioning, this one carried certainty and passion. When they finally separated, she said, "Among my people, there is a binding ritual, a way of connecting two souls so deeply that neither distance nor death can truly part them." Thane looked into her eyes, understanding the significance of what she was suggesting. "Are you sure?" In answer, Lyra guided his hand to the markings along her neck. "These lines carry my essence, my memories, my truth. When two Verlin join, their lines connect, creating a shared pattern." She smiled gently. "It's not quite the same with humans, but the principle remains. A connection, once formed, endures." That night, in the privacy of Thane's quarters aboard the Wanderer, they established a bond that transcended physical intimacy. As Thane's hand traced the luminous patterns on Lyra's skin, he felt a surge of emotion that wasn't entirely his own, echoes of her feelings, her memories, her hopes. And through their connected touch, Lyra experienced the depth of Thane's remorse for Arcadia IV, his determination to make amends, his growing love for her. By morning, something fundamental had changed between them. They moved in concert, anticipating each other's needs and thoughts without words. As they donned their disguises, Thane in the crisp syndicate uniform, Lyra in the simple shift of a pleasure unit, their external appearances belied the profound connection they now shared. Ilrich noticed the change immediately. "Something's different," he observed as they made final preparations. "The empathic bond. You completed it." Lyra nodded, unembarrassed. "It will help us stay connected, even when we can't speak openly." Ilrich's expression was unreadable. "Just be careful. Strong emotions can be distracting in the field." "Or motivating," Thane countered. The journey to Helios Prime took 16 hours, the Wanderer traveling under false identification codes provided by Ilrich's network. As they approached the massive Syndicate complex, a sprawling metropolis built into the side of a terraformed asteroid, Thane felt Lyra's tension through their new bond. "It will be all right," he murmured as they prepared for landing. "Remember, you've been here before. You know this place." "Yes," Lyra agreed, her voice steady despite the fear he could sense beneath it. "I know exactly what awaits us." Helios Prime Control was predictably suspicious of an unscheduled arrival claiming to transport Commander Volkov's property. But the credentials Ilrich had provided held up to initial scrutiny, and after tense minutes of verification, they were granted landing clearance. "Docking Bay 12C," the controller instructed. "Security will meet you upon arrival." "Acknowledged," Thane replied in the clipped tones of a syndicate officer. "Tell them to bring a containment collar. The unit has shown signs of resistance." The addition was a calculated risk. Creating the expectation that Lyra might not appear fully docile would explain any lapses in her conditioning act. As they descended toward the docking bay, Thane turned to Lyra one last time. Ready? She nodded, her eyes already taking on the vacant stare of a conditioned unit. Ready. The transformation was remarkable and disturbing. In seconds, the vibrant, intelligent woman he knew disappeared behind a mask of empty subservience. Her posture shifted, becoming more mechanical, her gaze unfocused. If Thane hadn't been able to feel her alert consciousness through their bond, he might have believed the act himself. The landing was smooth, the security reception less so. 6 armed guards met them at the base of the Wanderer's ramp, weapons at ready. Lieutenant Harding, Thane introduced himself, presenting his credentials. Delivering recovered property to Central Processing as ordered by Commander Volkov. The security captain, a hard-faced woman with implants visible along her jawline, studied the credentials carefully. We weren't notified of any recovery operation. The commander prefers operational security, Thane replied smoothly. After the embarrassment of the initial theft, the captain's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. Another guard approached with a requested containment collar, a cruel device designed to deliver shocks if the wearer strayed from assigned coordinates. That won't be necessary, Thane said sharply. The unit is stable now. I reconditioned it myself. Protocol requires, the guard began. Protocol can go to hell, Thane interrupted. Do you want to explain to Volkov why his property was damaged by unnecessary restraints? The guard faltered, looking to his captain for guidance. She studied Thane for a long moment, then gestured for the guard to stand down. Your authorization checks out, she admitted reluctantly. But I'll be accompanying you to Central Processing. Standard procedure for high-value recoveries. It was a complication they'd anticipated but hoped to avoid. Still, Thane nodded as if the escort was of no consequence. Of course, Captain. Reeves, she supplied. Captain Reeves. Let's proceed, Captain Reeves, Thane said. I've had a long journey, and I'd like to complete my assignment. They moved through the complex, Lyra following mutely behind Thane, Captain Reeves, and 2 guards escorting them. The interior of Helios Prime was as cold and efficient as its reputation suggested. Stark corridors, minimal decoration, maximum security. Every doorway featured biometric scanners, every intersection monitored by surveillance drones. Through their bond, Thane could sense Lyra's growing tension as memories of her captivity threatened to overwhelm her. He projected calm reassurance back to her, helping her maintain the facade of emptiness. Central Processing is on level 22, Captain Reeves explained as they entered a high-security elevator. All recovered units are processed there before reassignment. The commander was explicit, Thane countered. This unit is to be delivered directly to Tracking Control on level 37 for special programming. Reeves frowned. That's highly irregular. Tracking Control doesn't handle unit programming. Perhaps for standard units, Thane agreed smoothly. But this one was specifically modified for information extraction. Its recovery is a significant intelligence coup. The lie was a gamble, but one based on Lyra's actual capabilities as an empath. If questioned, they could demonstrate her ability to read emotions, a skill the Syndicate would indeed value for interrogation purposes. Reeves still looked skeptical, but didn't argue further. She input the authorization for level 37, and the elevator began its ascent. Through their bond, Thane felt Lyra's warning, a flash of recognition and alarm. Captain Reeves was suspicious, her hand drifting subtly toward her weapon. The guards, too, were tensing, responding to some silent signal. Captain, Thane said suddenly, his voice conversational, I understand Volkov's most recent campaign on the Iridium front was particularly successful. The statement was a test. Anyone truly familiar with Syndicate operations would know that the Iridium campaign had been a costly failure, one of the few black marks on Volkov's record. Reeves's eyes narrowed. Yes, very successful, she agreed, falling into the trap. In that moment, Thane knew their cover was blown. The captain had been playing along, waiting for the right moment to act. That moment had arrived. Now, Thane shouted. Lyra dropped her docile facade instantly, her body moving with fluid grace as she disabled the nearest guard with a precise strike to his throat. Simultaneously, Thane drew the concealed blaster from beneath his uniform jacket, firing at the second guard before he could raise his weapon. Captain Reeves was faster than either of them anticipated. Her hand had already closed around her blaster, bringing it to bear on Thane. But before she could fire, Lyra was there, her empathic abilities allowing her to anticipate the captain's movements. She knocked the weapon aside, the shot going wide and striking the elevator's control panel. The elevator lurched, then began to descend rapidly, emergency protocols engaging after the damage to the controls. Alarms blared, red emergency, lighting casting everything in a bloody glow. Reeves fought with the desperate strength of a cornered predator, enhanced reflexes making her a formidable opponent. But she was facing two adversaries who moved as one, their bond allowing perfect coordination. Thane struck from one side as Lyra attacked from the other, overwhelming the captain's defenses. Within seconds, the fight was over. Reeves lay unconscious, along with her guards. The elevator continued its uncontrolled descent, the floors flashing by on the indicator panel. "We need to get out before we hit bottom," Thane said grimly. "The impact protocols will lock this elevator down completely." Lyra nodded, already moving to the maintenance hatch in the ceiling. With Thane's help, she forced it open, then pulled herself through. Thane followed, pausing only to retrieve the captain's security badge and weapon. They emerged onto the elevator's roof to find themselves in a vertical shaft stretching seemingly endlessly above and below. Emergency handholds lined the walls, designed for maintenance workers caught in precisely this situation. "Level 31, Lyra said, glancing at the indicator lights flashing past. "We need to get across to those handholds before we drop any further." The gap between the moving elevator and the shaft wall was narrow but daunting. A miss would mean a fatal fall. Thane went first, timing his jump carefully and catching one of the handholds with a grunt of effort. He stabilized himself, then reached back, extending his hand toward Lyra. She leapt with perfect timing, her hand closing around his wrist as he caught hers. For a heart-stopping moment, they hung suspended. Then Thane pulled her in, both of them clinging to the handholds as the elevator continued its descent, eventually crashing with a distant boom at the bottom of the shaft. "So much for the subtle approach," Thane muttered as they began climbing toward a maintenance door visible about 10 meters above. "We need to hurry," Lyra urged. "They'll lock down the entire complex as soon as they realize what happened." They climbed rapidly, reaching the door just as the first security alert sounded throughout the shaft. Thane swiped Captain Reeves's badge over the scanner, and to their relief, the door hissed open, admitting them to a narrow maintenance corridor. "Where are we?" Thane asked, orienting himself. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, accessing memories of the complex's layout. "Level 29, she said. "Maintenance section. Tracking control is still 8 levels up." The distant sound of security teams mobilizing reached them. They needed a new plan. The direct approach was no longer viable. "The central server core," Lyra suggested suddenly. "It's on this level. All tracking data passes through it before reaching the control center. We could access the data from there?" Thane asked. "Possibly," Lyra nodded. "It would be encrypted, but with the right access." She glanced meaningfully at the security badge Thane had taken from Captain Reeves. A high-ranking security officer would have significant access privileges. "Worth a try," Thane agreed. "Lead the way." They moved through the maintenance corridors, avoiding the main passages where security would be heaviest. Lyra navigated with uncanny precision, her memories of the complex proving invaluable. When they encountered locked doors, Reeves's badge granted them access. When they spotted security drones, they waited in shadows until the path was clear. The server core was a massive chamber filled with towering racks of processing units, the heart of Helios Prime's computational power. A cold blue light bathed everything, and the hum of cooling systems provided cover for their movements. There, Lyra pointed to a terminal near the center of the room. "That's a primary access point." They approached cautiously, wary of additional security measures. Thane swiped the badge, and the terminal activated, displaying a login prompt. Now what? He murmured. We don't have Reeves's personal codes. Lyra studied the terminal, then placed her hands on the interface. Virulent empaths can sometimes read digital imprints, she explained. Emotional residue left behind by users. It's not precise, but she closed her eyes, concentrating intensely. After several tense moments, her fingers began to move across the interface, inputting a sequence of characters. The terminal processed the input, then displayed a new screen, access granted. How did you do that? Thane asked, impressed. I sensed her pattern, Lyra explained, already navigating through the system. The rhythm of her interactions with the machine. The codes themselves are just echoes of that pattern. The tracking database was massive, containing records for thousands of units across dozens of star systems. Lyra's fingers flew across the interface, initiating a search for virulent biosignatures. There, she breathed as results appeared on screen. 423 of my people, still alive. Her voice caught. So few. Can you download their locations? Thane asked gently. Lyra nodded, connecting Ilrich's data chip to the terminal. This will take a moment. The security protocols are... A sharp alarm cut her off, this one emanating from the terminal itself. Unauthorized access detected, an automated voice announced. Security protocols engaged. Lockdown initiating. Hurry, Thane urged, moving to guard the entrance to the server room. Almost, Lyra murmured, her fingers dancing across the interface. Just need to bypass the final encryption. The heavy doors to the server room began to close automatically as part of the lockdown procedure. Thane wedged himself in the opening, using his body to block the mechanism temporarily. Lyra, done, she exclaimed, yanking the data chip free. I have locations of all Virulent in Syndicate custody, plus the override codes for their trackers. Thane grunted with effort as the doors pressed against him. Then let's go. I can't hold this much longer. Lyra rushed to his side, slipping through the narrowing gap. Thane followed, barely making it through before the doors slammed shut with finality. They found themselves in a corridor rapidly filling with security personnel responding to the alarm. There was no path forward and no way back into the server room. Maintenance shaft, Lyra said urgently, pointing to a narrow access panel in the wall. Thane blasted the lock, and they squeezed inside just as the first security team rounded the corner. The shaft was cramped, designed for maintenance drones rather than humanoids. They crawled rapidly, guided by Lyra's memory of the complex's infrastructure. We need to get back to the Wanderer, Thane said. Can we reach the docking bay from here? Lyra shook her head. Not directly, but there's an external maintenance hatch 3 sections ahead. We could exit there, then use the emergency ladders to reach level 10. From there, we might find a way to the docking bays. It was a desperate plan, but they had few options. They continued through the shaft until they reached the hatch Lyra had mentioned. It opened onto the exterior of the complex, the vast, curved surface of Helios Prime exposed to the vacuum of space, protected only by a thin energy field that maintained atmosphere while allowing ships to pass through. Are you sure about this? Thane asked, eyeing the emergency ladder that ran along the exterior, a dizzying path with nothing but stars below. No, Lyra admitted, but I'm sure about us. They sealed their jumpsuits, activating the emergency atmospheric fields built into the collars. Enough protection for a brief excursion into vacuum, though far from ideal. Then, with a shared nod, they opened the hatch. The cold of space hit them instantly, their atmospheric fields crackling as they stepped onto the exterior ladder. Below them stretched the vast emptiness of space. Above, the curved bulk of Helios Prime continued for what seemed like eternity. They began their descent, moving as quickly as the treacherous conditions allowed. The energy field protecting the complex shimmered just meters away, a tantalizing barrier between them and the relative safety of atmosphere. They had descended perhaps a third of the way to level 10 when disaster struck. A security drone, patrolling the exterior, spotted them. Its alarm blared silently in the vacuum as it moved to intercept. Thane raised his blaster, but in the awkward position on the ladder, his shot went wide. The drone fired back, its energy pulse striking the ladder just above Lyra. The metal superstructure groaned, then gave way. Lyra fell, a silent scream on her lips as the ladder collapsed beneath her. Thane lunged downward, catching her wrist just as she began to drift away from the complex. For a terrifying moment, they hung suspended, Thane clinging to the broken ladder with one hand, Lyra's wrist grasped in the other. Through their bond, he felt her fear, not of death, but of failure, of leaving their mission incomplete. And beneath that, a love so profound it transcended the fear entirely. With a surge of desperate strength, Thane pulled her back toward the ladder. Lyra caught a handhold, stabilizing herself just as the drone circled back for another attack. This time, Lyra was ready. She drew her own blaster and fired with perfect accuracy, striking the drone's central processor. It exploded in a silent flash, debris scattering harmlessly into space. They continued their descent, the damaged ladder groaning ominously with each movement. When they finally reached level 10, they were gasping for breath, their emergency field struggling to maintain atmosphere. The external hatch was locked, but Reeves's security badge still functioned. They tumbled inside, the hatch sealing behind them as atmosphere flooded the small airlock. "We need to keep moving," Thane said once they could breathe normally again. "They'll have the whole complex searching for us by now." "This way," Lyra indicated, leading them through service corridors toward the docking sectors. Twice they had to hide from security patrols. Once they were forced to backtrack when they encountered a sealed security checkpoint. But finally, they reached Docking Bay 12C, where the Wanderer waited, surrounded by a full contingent of security forces. "We'll never get through all of them," Thane muttered, assessing the situation from their hiding place in a maintenance alcove. Lyra's expression was determined. "We don't have to. We just need to reach the ship." Before Thane could ask what she meant, she closed her eyes, concentrating intensely. Through their bond, he felt her reaching out, her empathic abilities extending beyond normal range. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Creating a diversion," Lyra replied, her voice strained with effort. In the docking bay, something strange began to happen. The security forces, previously alert and focused, began to shift uneasily. Several looked around in confusion. Others gripped their weapons more tightly. Within moments, the order group had devolved into chaos as guards began shouting at one another, responding to fears and suspicions that existed only in their minds. "Emotional manipulation," Lyra explained, sweat beading on her brow from the effort. "Amplifying existing tensions, suppressing rational thought. I can't maintain it for long." They moved quickly, using the confusion to approach the Wanderer undetected. They were halfway up the ramp when one of the guards noticed them, raising his weapon with a shout of alarm. Thane fired first, his shot catching the guard in the shoulder. More weapons turned in their direction. "Get to the cockpit," Thane ordered, providing covering fire as Lyra raced up the ramp. She reached the ship's interior, then turned back, unwilling to leave him exposed. "Thane!" He backed up the ramp, still firing, when a blaster bolt caught him in the side. The impact spun him around, sending him sprawling onto the deck of the Wanderer. Lyra slapped the control panel, the ramp closing as more shots struck the hull. "Thane!" Lyra was at his side instantly, her hands pressing against the wound in his side. Blood seeped between her fingers, alarmingly bright against his pale skin. "Get us out of here," Thane gasped, fighting to remain conscious. "Start the ship." Lyra hesitated, torn between staying with him and the need to escape. Then she was moving, racing to the cockpit. The Wanderer's engines roared to life under her command, the ship lifting off even as the security forces attempted to activate docking clamps to hold it in place. Lyra had watched Thane pilot enough times to understand the basics, but her hands moved with more than just observed knowledge. Through their bond, she accessed his muscle memory, his instinctive understanding of the ship's controls. The Wanderer responded to her touch as if Thane himself were at the helm. They burst free of the docking bay, emergency thrusters propelling them away from Helios Prime. Security vessels were already in pursuit, their weapons hot. Lyra engaged the hyperdrive without waiting for jump calculations, a desperate maneuver that risked collision but offered their only chance of escape. The stars stretched into lines, and the Wanderer leapt into hyperspace, leaving Helios Prime and its pursuers behind. Only then did Lyra return to Thane, who lay pale and still on the deck where she had left him. The wound in his side was severe, bleeding freely despite his attempts to staunch it. "Stay with me," Lyra pleaded, applying emergency medical foam from the ship's first aid kit. "Thane, please stay with me." His eyes fluttered open, finding hers with effort. "Did we make it?" "Yes," Lyra assured him, working quickly to stabilize the wound. "We're in hyperspace. We have the data. We succeeded." A weak smile touched his lips. "Never doubted it." The medical foam expanded, sealing the wound temporarily, but Thane needed proper medical attention. His pulse was rapid but weakening, his skin cool to the touch. "I need to get you to a doctor," Lyra said, fear tightening her throat. "Ilrich," Thane murmured. The beacon, the emergency beacon Ilrich had given them. Lyra retrieved it from Thane's pocket, activating it with trembling fingers. The device beeped once, then emitted a steady pulse, broadcasting their location to Ilrich's network. "Hold on," she urged Thane, cradling his head in her lap. "Help is coming. Just hold on." Through their bond, she poured strength into him, her empathic abilities working to stabilize his fading life force. She sang to him in the ancient Verulan tongue, a healing melody passed down through generations of her people. Hours passed, Thane drifting in and out of consciousness. Lyra maintained their course through hyperspace, checking on him constantly, using every medical technique she knew to keep him alive. Just when her hope began to falter, the ship's communications system chimed. A familiar voice came through the speakers. "Ilrich. Wanderer, this is Ilrich. We've locked onto your signal. Prepare for rendezvous in 3 minutes." Relief flooded through Lyra. "He's here," she told Thane, squeezing his hand. "Ilrich is here." The rendezvous was a blur of activity. Ilrich's ship, a converted medical transport, docked with the Wanderer. A medical team rushed aboard, quickly assessing Thane's condition and transferring him to their advanced medical bay. "Will he live?" Lyra asked as a doctor tended to Thane's wound. "The injury is severe," the doctor replied honestly. "But he's strong, and you've done an excellent job keeping him stable. With proper treatment, yes, I believe he'll recover." The hours that followed were the longest of Lyra's life. She remained by Thane's side as the medical team worked, her hand in his, their bond a constant reassurance of his continued presence. When Ilrich found her there, exhausted but unwavering, he didn't seem surprised. "You got the data?" he asked quietly. Lyra nodded, handing him the precious chip containing the locations of every captive Verulan and the override codes for their trackers. "We can deactivate them remotely, free them from chemical control." Ilrich's organic eye widened. "That's more than we hoped for. With this, we can not only locate them, but liberate their minds before we even reach them." "How many can you save?" Lyra asked. "With the network I've built?" Ilrich's expression grew determined. "All of them." It was 2 days before Thane regained full consciousness. When he opened his eyes, Lyra was there, her face the first thing he saw. "Hi," he said weakly. Tears filled her eyes. "Hi yourself." "We made it," Thane said, the memory returning in pieces. "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "We made it, and Ilrich has already dispatched teams to begin extracting my people. The first group was recovered yesterday. 12 Verulan from a mining operation in the Cygnus sector. 12 down, Thane said with a small smile. 411 to go. And not just Verulan, Lyra added. Ilrich says the tracking system contained data on thousands of captives from dozens of species. The information we acquired could dismantle the entire syndicate slave trade. Thane's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "So what's next for us?" "For us," Lyra repeated, her heart swelling at the simple phrase. "Yes, us," Thane confirmed. "Assuming you still want there to be an us." Through their bond, Lyra felt his uncertainty, not about his own feelings, but about whether she would choose to stay with him now that her people were being freed, now that she had options beyond running and hiding. In answer, she leaned down and kissed him gently. There was never any doubt, she whispered against his lips. My place is with you, Thane Mercer, wherever that may be. And where will that be? Thane asked. Once I'm healed. Lyra smiled, her green eyes shimmering with purpose. Wherever we're needed. There are still hundreds of my people to find to help recover from conditioning, and thousands of others who need freedom. Our work is just beginning. Thane nodded, squeezing her hand. Then we'd better get started. 3 months later, the Wanderer approached a small, verdant moon in a system far from Syndicate influence. Below, a settlement was taking shape. Simple structures nestled among towering trees, surrounded by gardens and gathering spaces. On the observation deck, Thane stood with his arm around Lyra, watching as a shuttle transported another group of rescued Verilyn to their new home. It's beautiful, Lyra said softly. A new beginning. The settlement, named Haven by its residents, had become a sanctuary for recovered captives. Here, freed Verilyn and others worked to heal from their traumas, to rediscover their cultural heritage, to build lives of their own choosing. Ilrich's report came in this morning, Thane told her. 3 more extraction teams successful. 37 more Verilyn freed. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, reaching out with her empathic senses. Below, she could feel the growing community, minds healing, bonds reforming, hope taking root. I never thought I'd see this day, she admitted. When I was in that auction house, I believed my people were lost forever. That I was lost forever. Thane pulled her closer. You were never lost. Not really. You just needed someone to see you. And name me, Lyra added with a smile. Don't forget that part. How could I? It's the most important part of the story. Thane kissed her temple gently. The day Lyra found her name again. Below them, a group of Verilyn children, rescued from a conditioning facility before the process could be completed, ran through a meadow, their laughter carrying even to the ship above. Their violet skin gleamed in the sunlight, their silver-white hair floating around their faces like halos. Will we stay? Thane asked, watching the children play. Make Haven our home? Lyra considered the question. For a while, perhaps. My people need me, need us. But there are still so many captives to free, so much work to do. The Wanderer will always be ready, Thane assured her. Whenever we're needed. Lyra turned in his arms, facing him fully. Through their bond, she shared her vision of the future, not just rescues and liberation, but building a movement, a force that could stand against the Syndicate and other oppressors. A future where no one was called a unit or treated as property, where everyone had a name and the freedom to use it. It won't be easy, Thane cautioned. The worthwhile things rarely are, Lyra replied. But we'll face it together. As the sun set over Haven, casting the settlement in a golden glow, Thane and Lyra returned to the cockpit of the Wanderer. There was a new mission waiting, another group of captives identified, another chance to bring freedom to those who had been denied it. They took their seats, pilot and co-pilot, partners in every sense, and prepared the ship for departure. The Wanderer hummed to life around them, responding eagerly to their touch. Ready? Thane asked, though he already knew the answer through their bond. Lyra's hand found his, their fingers intertwining over the controls. Always, she replied. Together, they guided the Wanderer upward, leaving Haven behind, but carrying its purpose with them into the stars. There would be dangers ahead, battles to fight, lives to save. But whatever came, they would face it as one, the man who had given a name and the woman who had found her freedom. The ship broke atmosphere, the vast expanse of space stretching before them like an endless promise. Lyra input the coordinates for their next mission, and Thane engaged the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the Wanderer leapt forward into the future they would build together.